Hello everyone, this is Venom Geek Media here, and today, before we start, I'd like to shout out to all of my channel members. Once again, if you want to support the channel, consider becoming a member. Click in the box below, and you can support the channel. Thank you very much. Right, today I'm going to be doing a top 5 most underrated starships. Not last week, but the week before last, I did widely defined as overrated and, overhyped in terms of its reputation, and now I want to cover 5 ships that I think haven't gotten enough love, either from the community or from the showmakers themselves. And by all means, share below what you think the top 5 most underrated ships are, and whether or not you agree with me. I'm sure there's going to be some entries on this list that might ruffle some feathers. So, we'll start with number 5, and number 5 is the Ambassador class. And not really because it's necessarily underrated by the community, but more that it's just undersold by the show. It's quite an impressive ship. It's similar volume to the Galaxy class. It's 100 meters smaller, but it's actually still big. A pretty big ship. And aside from being used in Next Generation as sort of a background ship, even then, it's never used as an admiral's ship, which is just bizarre because, look at it. It looks kind of it's, the closest thing to a flagship. There should be plenty of them, but we never really see that many Ambassador class, and by the time of the Dominion War, they're gone. Now, I do have explanations for why that is. By the time of the Dominion War, they're probably just building Galaxy refits, and, it's like at that point, you have kind of a second-rate, the Ambassador is sort of a second-rate battleship. It's like, why build an Ambassador when you can just build more Galaxies for pretty much the same components and the same kind of materials. So, but equally at the same time, I think it would have been nice to see it in the Dominion War and just more generally, but it's really only used in Next Generation, unless I'm missing something, let me know, which I think is a shame. I think it's a very nice design. I think it's very Constitution-esque, but brings it towards the more Next Generation aesthetic. I do like, by the way, the Andrew Probert prototype that he came up with, but I do understand why the showmakers didn't go for that, because it's a lot more Enterprise D, whereas I think the Enterprise C that we ended up with feels very much more like the Constitution, just bigger, a jumbo Constitution, as it were. So I think it's very strong design, it's got a strong look to it, but it's just underused, which I think is a bit of a shame. So that's my number 5 entry on this list. So coming in at number 4 is the Warp Delta. There is a proper name for the class, I can't remember it off the top of my head, and frankly I don't really care, because as far as I know it's the Warp Delta, and I think that's a nice name. I think it sticks very well. I really like this ship, and kind of because of how simple it is. I like all of that kind of Enterprise era kind of evolution of warp drive, and kind of seeing them advance the technology and try out different shapes and design and everything, very experimental, very much like sort of the early Jet Age, and anything that kind of reminds me of that is always going to be a very strong contender in that regard. And it looks, they're working out the shapes, and you can see kind of the evolution of the design from it. I also like the use of the bronze hull. I think that's very nice. Again, it gives it a more rustic, early kind of bolted together sort of feel. It's not necessarily a riveted ship, but you could definitely imagine it sort of being riveted. And there's an elegance in the design as well, actually. It's a very simplistic look, but very effective. I saw someone recently say that it looks like the original series Romulan Bird of Prey, and yes, in terms of there's an elegant simplicity to it, and it's just a very kind of pleasing, dynamic shape, and that I think kind of fits very well with the era. Well, other bits of Enterprise might feel a bit anachronistic. Personally, I don't mind it terribly, but other people, particularly those who like the Museo Ukazaki 22nd century, I can see where they're coming from, but I think the Warp Delta fits quite nicely as a 22nd century ship. So yeah, that's my entry for the Warp Delta. I think it's a very nice, very simple design, but I think it fits very well and is really quite underused. We only see it a couple of scenes in Enterprise as sort of a background ship, which is a shame. Perhaps if we'd gotten that Romulan War, season 5, we may have seen some more of it. So, that brings us to number 3, which is probably going to make me very unpopular. I have to admit, it's a bit of the guilty pleasure of mine, but I have to say that I really love, number 3, the Olympic class. And I can already see the people visibly cringing at the mention of the Olympic. Everyone has their guilty pleasure. For Space Dock, it's the Jaeger class. For me, it's the Olympic, and we all need to just kind of, accept that we all have our flaws. And yeah, my weak spot is the Olympic. Why? Well, because I like the sphere primary hull. I like that globe primary hull. And most people seem to tolerate it perfectly well on the Daedalus, but the moment it goes on the Olympic, people are just recoil. I can kind of understand why people don't like it. The secondary hull does kind of leave something to be desired. They could put a deflector dish on that bottom protrusion. The warp nacelle mounting isn't great. It's a bit far forward. In all things, it is a bit of an oddball ship, but I like it because it's a sphere hull ship. I really like the sphere hull, and I think it's a heavily underused design, and to see it in the 24th century is very good. I really like it, and I think it makes sense for what the ship is supposed to be. It's a medical ship. I think it's a hospital ship, which is a cool idea, and we don't see many other hospital ships at all. Well, I don't think we see any other hospital ships at all throughout the rest of Star Trek, which I think is a great shame, because I think it's, it helps to, ground Starfleet, when you have, when not everything is, a top of the line ship and you've got your support ships, and I think the Olympic is a good example of a good-looking support ship. It also breaks the mold a little bit and gives us something different to look at. It's clear by looking at it that it's not a frontline ship, So in that regard, I think it's very good. It's more easily distinguishable than, say, every other ship that has a saucer. I think it adds some variation. Like I say, I've got a real soft spot for the spherical primary hull. I think it's a really cool design that is just chronically underused, and I think I can see people's problems with the Olympic class, but I like the idea. I appreciate the effort and the concept, even if the execution is flawed. Now that brings us to number 2 on my list. Now, I'll probably have a lot of people's support. A lot of people really like the First Contact, the anti-Borg ships. But there's one that isn't really given much mention, and that is the Norway class, out of all of them. I think because it's got a very simplistic shape, and also it's very stripped back, it looks a bit underdone. But when you realise that, the way I try to frame it is, the reason it's so kind of skeletal is because it's very fast, and it's, they've pared the design down to its most essential elements to create a kind of a highly maneuverable frigate, or, well, very good. It, looks distinctive next to its contemporaries, and I like its role. Granted, this is a role that I've kind of, created out of my head canon, but I think it makes sense, and there's certainly precedent for it, with it having a lance phaser, because that's something that I think makes sense in its anti-Borg capacity and fills an important role in the fleet. like I say, it's a very simple, wedge-shaped design with warp nacelles, but like I say with the warp delta, sometimes that's all you need, and there's enough kind of detail and character to it to make it very individual. And other little things like the fact that the bridge is sort of semi-sunken, protected on either side, that makes a big difference. Some people put 2 torpedo launchers either side of the deflector / phaser emitter. That's really cool. So it's a design that really has a lot of potential. It just, part of the problem was it never got a very good CGI model, which is why we don't really see it that much. But aside from that, it's a very strong design, and I think, it fits within its fleet. There's a good sense of continuity with it, but it still feels very unique and has that very unique role, which I really like. So, yeah, I think the Norway is a really underrated class. And that brings us to number 1. Now this will really ruffle some feathers. And I put it at number 1 because I think it is the most deserving of praise. And that is the Nimrod class. Now, you're probably thinking, what is the Nimrod class? I've never heard of it. You'd be forgiven for having not heard of it. It appeared, I think, in only 1, maybe 2 episodes, and that was the finale of Discovery Season 2, that horrendous space battle, where, it was just a bunch of drones blowing up and nothing made sense, and trust me, I'll be the first to criticize that space battle. And one of the things that I will criticize it for is for underusing the Nimrod class. I mean, look at this. This is a really nice ship. In my opinion, it succeeds where the Vengeance from Into Darkness failed. Because basically, the Vengeance was what you'd call a bug ship. Or well, not necessarily bug ship, just bug, which is just a way of describing anything that is a sort of villain ship, that is, or villain anything really, and that is big, ugly, grey. You think about most sci-fi superhero villains, and as a general rule, that is what the villain aesthetic for most of pop culture has been for quite a while, is big, ugly, and grey. And it's quite boring. But I think the Nimrod does a very good job of being unique and having character to it. It's clearly a villain ship. Look at the dark colours, the aggressive shape and everything. It's, clearly a bad guy ship. But it has enough character and it makes sense. It's got individuality to it. It does have similar things to Discovery, but it does a lot of things different to Discovery. It has that arrowhead primary hull. It has 4 nacelles, and I love 4 nacelle designs. It's got a unique shape to it. Its use of colour is really nice, going for that kind of black and blue is very striking. There's a kind of an old adage for how you should design alien ships in sci-fi, or even just generally bad guy ships in sci-fi. And that is that they should look like human ships, but a different faction. Well, this is, of course, a different faction of humans, and I think it works very well. If, Star Trek ever wanted to kind of have a breakaway Federation faction, this is a good example of how you can have a ship that looks human, is different, it's a separate faction, and I think it's executed very well. It was actually designed by concept artist Ryan Denning, and yeah, it's really nice. There's also, I'm just going to give a shout out to Quantum Designs AZ. Check out his animation for the Nimrod class. It's really cool. It has moving nacelles and moving pylons. Okay, it's not, I'll be the first to say, it is not a 23rd century ship. It's still gorgeous. It's still an absolutely beautiful design, and is just a great example of how you can really mix up that Federation aesthetic and create something that is distinct and looks distinct on screen. Looking at this ship in detail makes me even more annoyed at the final battle of Season 2, because we could have had just, like, say, 2 of these and some of those little Section 31 scout ships, or, just one of these and some Section 31 scout ships going up against Discovery and Enterprise in a proper just ship-to-ship battle, and that would have been so good. I mean, it just looks great, and it just, unfortunately, it just gets put on screen and it just sits there being useless, which I think is a great shame, because it's absolutely beautiful, and I think he really deserves some credit on this. This is a very creative and unique design, and I think it deserves more love. It's not its fault that it ended up in a bad story and a even worse space battle, because I think in terms of the actual ship itself and the design and the artwork is absolutely spot on. So yes, that is my number 1 pick for the most underrated Starfleet ships. So let me know what you guys think in the comments below. What are your top 5 underrated ships? And I will see you guys in the next video.